The rabbits cost 40 cents each from the back of a feed store crate in Barton County on a Monday morning in March of 1933. 6 of them. And the reason they were 40 cents was that nobody in the county wanted rabbits that looked like small clouds of confusion, all fur and no obvious purpose, when the same 40 cents could buy a laying hen that at least produced something a person could name. Ruth Callant stood at the crate for a long time before she paid for them. She had come to the feed store for baling wire and a sack of cracked corn, and she had $11 in the coffee tin under the floorboard, which was what remained of a household account that had been shrinking steadily since her father's heart gave out in the plowed field behind the house 18 months earlier and left her alone with 40 acres, a mortgage that the bank had not yet decided to call, and the particular exhaustion of a woman who had been doing 2 people's work since she was 23. The rabbits were English Angoras, the feed store man told her, though he said it the way a man says something he has read on a shipping label, rather than something he understands. A breeder outside Great Bend had gone under in January and sold his stock cheap to anyone who would take them off his hands before the bank took the property. These 6 had come in a lot of 20, the last of them, the ones nobody had wanted at the sale itself. They were white or had been white once, their coats matted in places from a winter of inconsistent care, but underneath the matting, Ruth could see it, the same thing she had learned to look for in her father's Herefords and in good seed corn and in anything else worth taking seriously, a quality that did not announce itself but that was there if a person knew where to look. The fiber was fine, finer than anything she had felt on a sheep, finer than the store-bought Angora scarf her mother had owned before the mortgage ate the money that bought such things. She rubbed a tuft of it between her fingers and felt something that was less like wool and more like a rumor of warmth. Her father had told her once that the unusual thing was either worthless or worth everything, and that the only way to find out was to take it seriously enough to look closely. She looked closely. She paid the $2.40 for 6 half-starved rabbits with matted coats and eyes that watched her with more attention than she expected from an animal that size. And she loaded the hutch crate into the truck bed and drove the 11 miles home with the coffee tin considerably lighter and no clear plan beyond the conviction that she had just bought something the county did not yet understand. Before we find out what Ruth builds from 6 half-starved rabbits and $2.40, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. This channel reaches people from all across the country, and we love knowing where these stories land. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now. New stories every week. The Callant place sat on the flat wheat country south of the Arkansas River, 40 acres that her father had worked since 1911, and that Ruth had kept working alone since his death. The wheat rotation and the kitchen garden and the 12 laying hens that were the only steady income the farm produced, now that wheat prices had fallen to a point where harvesting a crop sometimes cost more than the crop was worth. She had $11 in the coffee tin, now $8.60, a mortgage payment due in June that she was not yet certain she could make, and a farm that had been operating on the specific margin of a woman who did everything correctly and was still one bad season from a letter she did not want to receive. She had not planned on rabbits, but she had been reading about them since the previous autumn in a farm journal her father had subscribed to that she kept receiving out of habit and had begun reading with real attention once the wheat income started its decline. Angora rabbit fiber, the journal explained, was harvested rather than sheared, plucked or clipped from the animal every 3 to 4 months without harming it. An animal that could be kept in a small hutch on scraps and garden trimmings and produce 4 harvests a year of fiber that sold, when the quality was right, for prices that made wool look like what it was, a commodity in a market that did not care about it. The journal had mentioned a supply problem developing in the fiber trade. Most Angora wool sold in America came from France, where the rabbits had been bred for over a century, and the French export trade had been unsettled since 1931 by currency troubles and by farmers there converting Angora operations to more profitable livestock as European markets shifted. American buyers were starting to look for domestic sources. There were not many. Ruth built the first hutch bank from lumber salvaged out of a collapsed grain bin her father had never gotten around to repairing. 3 tiers of wire-bottom hutches facing south for winter light, elevated off the ground on cedar posts to keep them dry and to keep the manure, which she had also read was valuable as a slow-release garden fertilizer, unlike the hot manure of larger livestock, collecting cleanly beneath for later use. She cleaned the 6 rabbits of their matting with a wide-toothed comb worked in from the edges, patient sessions of 20 minutes each that she did in the evening after the hens were shut in and the day's other work was finished. Underneath the matting, once it was gone, the coats came in dense and correct, the specific quality the journal had described as the difference between ordinary rabbit fur and true Angora fiber, a soft undercoat protected by longer guard hairs, the whole structure built to trap air and hold warmth in a way that no other natural fiber matched pound for pound. She fed them a mix of the cracked corn she already bought for the hens, timothy hay she cut from the fence lines where it grew wild and free, and garden trimmings through the summer months, carrot tops and beet greens and the outer leaves of cabbage that she would otherwise have composted. The feed cost was close to nothing, which the journal had promised and which she confirmed for herself in a notebook she began keeping the week she brought them home. A ledger with a column for feed cost and a column, still empty, for what the fiber might bring. Daniel Voss came to the west fence the second Saturday in March. He farmed the adjoining 80 acres, wheat and a small dairy operation he had been running since his own father's passing 3 years earlier, and he had a legitimate reason to be at the fence that day. A section of shared boundary wire that had come loose over the winter and needed resetting before cattle from either side wandered where they should not. He was tall in the rangy way of a man who walked more of his acreage than he rode, brown-haired, going sun-streaked at the crown, with steady gray eyes that had a habit of taking in a situation fully before he said anything about it. He reset the wire without being asked twice, and then stood at the fence a moment longer than the work required, looking past Ruth toward the new hutch bank visible near the barn. "What are those?" he said. Not quite a question, more the opening move of one. "Angora rabbits," she said, "for the fiber." He considered this with the specific patience she would come to recognize as characteristic of him, the unhurried processing of a man who did not commit to an opinion before he had examined the available facts. "Rabbits," he said. "6 of them," she said. "Bought them off the Crenshaw dispersal, out past Great Bend." He looked at the hutches again, then at her, and something in his gray eyes shifted from skepticism toward a more careful kind of attention, the look of a man revising an assessment in real time rather than defending one he had already made. "My mother had a rabbit fur muff," he said, "before the war. French, I think. Cost more than most things she owned." He did not say anything further about it. He picked up his fence tool and said he would check the north section of the shared line the following Tuesday, since a post there had been leaning since the spring thaw, and then he went back across the field to his own side, and Ruth stood at the fence for a moment considering that he had not told her the rabbits were foolish, which was more than most of the county had managed since word got around. The first harvest came in June, 3 months after she had brought them home, when the fiber had grown to the 2-inch length the journal specified as ready. She learned the clipping technique from a diagram in the same journal, working with sharp shears held flat against the skin, taking the fiber in sections rather than trying to clip the whole animal at once, careful of the loose skin at the flanks where a nervous animal could be nicked if a person hurried. She did not hurry. The first session on the first rabbit, a buck she had started calling Samson for the sheer volume of coat he carried, took the better part of an hour, and she came away with 4 ounces of clean white fiber and a much less impressive-looking rabbit who seemed, if anything, relieved. She worked through all 6 over the following week, harvesting each at its own readiness rather than on a fixed schedule, and the total came to 1 pound 11 ounces, which she weighed on the kitchen scale and recorded in the ledger with the specific satisfaction of a number that existed where no number had existed 3 months earlier. She washed the fiber gently in lukewarm water with a mild soap, laid it to dry on clean toweling in the spare room where the light was good and the dust from the yard could not reach it, and when it was dry, she sat at the kitchen table and ran it between her fingers again, the way she had at the feed store crate in March, and found the same thing she had found then, a fineness that did not feel like anything else on the farm. We're halfway through this story, and we want to know, have you ever raised or handled Angora rabbits or worked with a fiber this fine? Tell us in the comments. We read every one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is your reminder. New stories every week. The county had opinions, as the county always did, about a woman doing something it had not seen before. Orval Pruitt at the grain elevator told anyone who would listen that Ruth Callant had gone soft in the head keeping rabbits like house pets while her wheat acreage went half-managed, and that a woman alone on a farm needed to keep her attention on things that mattered, rather than fancy animals that did not belong in Barton County. Mrs. Aclot at the dry goods store, who had known Ruth's mother, said it was a shame, the particular shame reserved for grief that had apparently curdled into eccentricity, and that Ruth had always seemed like a sensible girl before her father passed. Ruth heard both opinions secondhand, the way county opinions always traveled, and thanked the people who reported them to her with the same even courtesy she gave everyone, and did not change anything about what she was doing. Her wheat acreage was, in fact, fully managed. She had simply stopped explaining her schedule to people who had not asked how she managed her time, only whether she had lost her sense. Daniel's fence pretext resolved itself formally in late June, when the shared line was reset along its full length, and there was, by any honest accounting, no further reason for him to be checking wire on a weekly basis. Ruth mentioned this to him directly, standing at the fence on a Tuesday evening with the low sun turning the wheat gold on both sides of the boundary. "The line's solid now," she said. "You don't need to keep checking it." "I know," he said. He did not offer an alternate reason and did not stop coming. He came the following Tuesday to ask, with the same unhurried directness, how the second harvest was shaping up, and stayed to help her move a hutch that needed repositioning out of afternoon sun that had gotten stronger as summer settled in. He did not tell her how to run the operation. He asked questions that showed he had been thinking about the answers, and when she needed a hand with something practical, he provided it without requiring the request to be elaborate. The second harvest in September yielded 2 pounds 3 ounces, the rabbits having settled into the rhythm of it, and Ruth having gotten faster and more confident with the shears. She had, by then, written to 3 fiber buyers whose names she found through the Farm Journal's classified section, 2 mills in the east that processed specialty fiber, and 1 private buyer in Kansas City who dealt directly in luxury textile materials for the garment trade. The Kansas City buyer, a man named Aldous Feiner, wrote back within 2 weeks with an offer that made Ruth read the letter twice at the kitchen table before she believed the number on the page. He would pay, he wrote, $4.50 per pound for clean, properly processed English Angora fiber, provided the quality matched the small sample she had enclosed with her inquiry, which he confirmed it did, exceptional in fineness and free of the guard hair contamination that plagued most of what reached him from inexperienced producers. He noted that American-sourced Angora fiber was, at present, extremely difficult for him to obtain in any quantity, the French supply having grown unreliable, and that he would take everything of this quality she could produce. $4.50 a pound. Wool at the time brought perhaps 30 cents a pound at the county co-op, when the co-op was buying it all. Ruth sat with the letter and did the arithmetic in the ledger, the 6 rabbits producing something near 2 pounds per harvest now that they were established. 4 harvests a year, feed cost negligible, against a wheat crop that in a bad year returned less than it cost to bring in. She was not going to be a wealthy woman on 6 rabbits, but she understood, sitting at that table, that she had found the thing her father had described, the unusual thing that turned out to be worth everything, and that the path forward was not 6 rabbits but 60. She shipped the September harvest to Kansas City in a padded crate lined with clean paper, and the payment arrived 3 weeks later, $9.45 for the fiber, more than she had cleared from the entire wheat operation across the previous harvest season once seed and fuel and the elevator's cut were subtracted. Daniel was at the fence when the letter with the payment arrived, and he watched her cross the yard from the mailbox with the specific walk of a person who has just confirmed a calculation. She showed him the check. He looked at it for a long moment, then at the hutch bank, then at her. $9, he said, from rabbits. From 2 pounds 3 ounces of fiber, she said, and there will be another harvest in December and another in March, and by next spring I intend to have 20 breeding animals instead of 6. She had already worked out the numbers for that too, and had begun, quietly, negotiating with a second Crenshaw-adjacent breeder in Ellenwood who had 8 animals of similar bloodline he was willing to part with at a fair price now that word of the Kansas City buyer had started, in the particular way of small counties, to travel. "You did the arithmetic in March," he said, "when you bought them." "I did the arithmetic before I bought them," she said. "That's the only kind that's any use." He was quiet a moment, turning something over the way he did before he said it. "I told my mother about the rabbits," he said, "in April. She said her old muff came from a farm outside Lyon in France, and that the fiber trade there had gone thin since the Frank troubles started. She said if anyone in Kansas figured out how to do what those French farms did, they'd be the only ones doing it for a good while." "I know," Ruth said. "That's why I'm not stopping at 6. By the following spring, the operation had grown to 22 breeding rabbits across 2 expanded hutch banks, and the harvests were running close to 11 pounds each quarter. The fiber sorted by grade and shipped to Kansas City in padded crates that Ruth now built herself from scrap lumber, having worked out through trial and one damaged shipment that the padding needed to be thicker than she had first assumed. Finer's payments had become a reliable quarterly income that exceeded the wheat operation's best year by a wide margin, and Ruth had used the first year's fiber income, along with what the wheat still brought in, to pay the June mortgage installment early for the first time since her father died. A fact she recorded in the ledger without comment because the ledger was not a place for comment, only for numbers, and the numbers said what they needed to say on their own. The county's opinion had shifted the way county opinion shifts, not with an apology, but with a change in the questions people asked. Orval Pruitt at the elevator had stopped mentioning rabbits at all, which Ruth understood to be his version of revision. Mrs. Aclot asked, the next time Ruth came into the dry goods store, whether it was true that a Kansas City buyer was paying real money for rabbit fur, and listened with genuine attention when Ruth told her the actual figures, and did not say anything further about sensible girls gone strange. Daniel had stopped inventing reasons to be at the fence sometime in October, not because he stopped coming, but because both of them had stopped requiring the pretense. He came on Tuesdays and often on Saturdays, and helped when the hutch banks needed expanding or when a difficult kindling required 2 sets of careful hands, and asked good questions about breeding pair selection that showed he had been reading on the subject himself, the way Ruth had noticed he read on any subject that mattered enough to him. He came to the door on a Saturday evening in April with a letter he said his mother had asked him to pass along, a note in an old woman's careful handwriting describing the fiber muff she had owned before the war, and how glad she was that someone in Kansas had found the way to do properly what the French farms had once done. Ruth read it at the kitchen table with Daniel across from her, the ledger open beside the letter, the number for the past year's fiber income written plainly in the column that had been empty when she started. She had learned, over that first full year, things the farm journal had only gestured toward. That temperament mattered nearly as much as coat quality when selecting breeding pairs, because a nervous doe produced a nervous litter, and a nervous rabbit was harder to harvest cleanly without stress that showed up, subtly, in the fiber itself. That the winter months required care she had not fully anticipated, the hutches needing extra bedding and windbreaks on the north side of the bank, since Angoras carried heavy coats but were not, despite appearances, built for direct exposure to a Kansas wind in January. That the December harvest, taken when the coat had grown through the coldest weather, tended to run finer than the June harvest, when faster summer growth coarsened the fiber slightly, a detail she confirmed across 2 full years of records, and that Finer himself noted when he began, without her asking, paying a small premium for the winter clip. She had also learned to say no. A buyer from Wichita had written in the second winter offering to purchase the entire breeding stock outright, 22 animals at the time, for a lump sum that would have cleared the mortgage in full immediately. She turned it down within a day and did not need Daniel or anyone else to help her see why. The rabbits were not a crop to be sold once. They were the operation itself, the thing that produced income 4 times a year for as long as she managed them correctly, and a lump sum today was worth less than what the hutch bank would produce across the coming decade if she kept it and let it grow. She wrote back thanking him and declining, and filed his letter away in case a use for it ever presented itself, which she doubted it would. "Your mother's right that it's rare," Ruth said, "but it's not luck. It's 4 harvests a year and clean grading and shears held flat so you don't nick the skin, and knowing which 2 rabbits to breed together for the finest coat. It's work, same as the wheat, only work that pays for itself. I know it's work, he said. I've watched you do it for over a year now. She looked at him across the table, at the steady gray eyes that had been arriving at the west fence with declining pretense since March of the previous year, and at the ledger with its 2 columns, feed cost and fiber income, the second column no longer empty and no longer small. Stay for supper, she said. Not for the rabbits, just supper. All right, he said, and something in his face settled the way a man's face settles when a thing he has been patient about arrives exactly when it was going to arrive, and not a moment before. He stayed for supper that Saturday, and the Saturday after, until staying for supper was simply the shape of Saturdays and had stopped needing to be an invitation at all. The hutch banks grew to 30 animals by the second autumn, and Ruth began keeping a breeding ledger alongside the fiber ledger, tracking bloodlines the way her father had tracked cattle bloodlines, building toward a flock, if that was the word for it, that would eventually supply not only Finer in Kansas City, but 2 of the eastern mills directly, the French supply having grown thinner still as the decade wore on, and American buyers looked increasingly toward whatever domestic sources they could find. If you've made it to the end of this story, thank you. Leave a comment below. What's the smallest, strangest investment you've ever made that turned out to be worth more than anyone expected? Your stories are what makes this community what it is. Subscribe if you haven't already. We'll have a new story for you next week. She sat at the kitchen table that 2nd October with the ledger open in front of her, the mortgage paid 2 years running, 30 rabbits settled in the hutch banks catching the last of the evening light, and Daniel's truck coming up the lane the way it came most evenings now. And she thought about the crate of matted, half-starved rabbits at the feed store, 40 cents each, that nobody else in the county had wanted. And she thought that her father had been right about the unusual thing, that the only way to know what it was worth was to look closely enough to find out, and that some Tuesdays a person got the answer to more than one question at once.